HOA. Karen calls 911, demands my farm become a public trail system. My family has owned this 200-acre plot since my grandfather bought it in 1945. We mainly grow corn and soybeans, with a small orchard and vegetable garden near the house. It's honest work that puts food on people's tables, and I'm proud of it. The trouble started when the Wildflower Meadows subdivision was built adjacent to my eastern property line last year. It's one of those upscale developments with an HOA and all the trimmings. Most of the new residents are city folks who probably think milk comes from the grocery store, not cows. Enter Karen Thompson, the newly elected HOA president. I first met her when she marched onto my property one Saturday morning while I was doing maintenance on my tractor. "Excuse me," she called out in that tone that immediately sets your teeth on edge. "I need to discuss something important with you." I wiped my hands on a rag and turned to face a woman in expensive athleisure wear, her highlighted hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to be polite. "Yes, I'm Karen Thompson, president of the Wildflower Meadows Homeowners Association," she announced, as if that title carried some kind of authority over my farm. "We've been discussing ways to increase our community's amenities, and we've decided your property would make an excellent trail system for our residents." I blinked, wondering if I'd heard her correctly. "Ma'am, this is private property. It's an active farm, not a park." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, we understand that, but surely you don't need all this land. We're thinking of creating walking paths around the perimeter, maybe some bike trails through the middle. It would really boost our property values." "I'm sorry, but that's not possible," I said firmly. "This is a working farm. There's heavy machinery, crop treatments, and it would be dangerous for people to be wandering around. Not to mention it's private property." Karen's friendly facade cracked slightly. "Well, I don't think you're being very community-minded. This area is developing, and you need to adapt. We're willing to maintain the trails and post signs about staying on marked paths." "The answer is no," I stated. "Please leave my property." "We'll see about that," she snapped, turning on her heel and storming off. I thought that would be the end of it, but Karen was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, she launched a campaign against my farm. She started posting on the neighborhood Facebook group about how I was H.O.A. rating land that could benefit the community. She claimed my farm was an eyesore, and that modern suburbs shouldn't have to look at agricultural equipment and fields. Things escalated when she began encouraging residents to trespass. I'd find people walking their dogs through my cornfields, leaving gates open, and even having picnics in my orchard. I put up no trespassing signs, but they were repeatedly torn down. I tried reasoning with the trespassers when I caught them. "This is private property, and it's dangerous to be here. There's heavy machinery, irrigation systems, and chemical treatments that could be harmful if you don't know what you're doing." Some apologized and left, but others had clearly drunk Karen's Kool-Aid. "It's selfish to keep all this land to yourself," one woman told me while her kids were climbing my apple trees. "This should be for everyone to enjoy." I started documenting everything, taking photos of trespassers, recording damage to crops and property, and filing police reports. The local officers were sympathetic, but could only do so much. They'd respond to calls and escort people off my property, but they couldn't station someone here, 24/7. The situation came to a head one Saturday morning when I was spraying fungicide on my corn crop. I was wearing full protective gear, coveralls, respirator, gloves, because these chemicals, while safe when properly applied and allowed to dry, can be dangerous with direct exposure. I spotted a group of about 15 people, led by Karen, walking through my field. There were adults, kids, and even dogs off-leash. My blood ran cold when I saw how close they were to the freshly sprayed area. I immediately shut off the sprayer and drove my tractor over to intercept them. "Stop!" I yelled through my respirator. "This area has just been treated with agricultural chemicals. You need to leave immediately." Instead of leaving, Karen pulled out her phone and started recording. "Look at this. He's spraying toxic chemicals where our children play. This is exactly why we need to take control of this land and make it safe for the community." "Your children shouldn't be playing here at all," I shouted, trying to keep my temper in check. "This is a working farm, not a park. You're all trespassing and you're putting yourselves in danger." Karen turned to her audience, playing to the camera. "See how aggressive he's being? And wearing that scary mask? He's just trying to intimidate us." She faced me again. "We have a right to be here. This is a public space." That's when I lost my patience. "This is absolutely not a public space. It is private property, and you are all trespassing. Leave now or I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Karen sneered. "In fact, I'll do it for you." She dialed 911 right there. What followed was surreal. I listened as Karen told the dispatcher that I was threatening peaceful residents with toxic chemicals and trying to prevent them from accessing public land. She claimed I was acting erratically and dangerous, and that she feared for the safety of the children present. I couldn't believe the lies coming out of her mouth. I pulled out my own phone and started recording while I called the sheriff's department on their non-emergency line. I knew most of the deputies from previous trespassing incidents, and I wanted to make sure they had the real story. Within minutes, 3 patrol cars arrived with lights flashing. Karen rushed to meet them, still recording and playing the victim. But her performance fell flat when Deputy Wilson, who had handled several of my previous trespassing complaints, stepped out of his car. "Mrs. Thompson," he said wearily, "we've been through this before. This is private property, not public land. You and your group are trespassing." "But he's spraying dangerous chemicals," she protested, pointing at me. "There are children present." "Yes, there are children present because you led them onto private property where agricultural chemicals are being legally applied," Deputy Wilson replied. "If anything, you're the one endangering them." He turned to address the group. "Everyone who doesn't own this property needs to leave immediately. Anyone still here in 5 minutes will be cited for trespassing." The crowd began to disperse, but Karen wasn't done. "This isn't over. We'll take this to the city council. We'll petition for eminent domain. You can't keep this land to yourself forever." Deputy Wilson stepped closer to her. "Mrs. Thompson, if you continue to organize trespassing on private property and file false police reports, you'll be facing criminal charges. Is that clear?" The look on Karen's face was priceless. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and stormed off without another word. After everyone left, Deputy Wilson stayed to take my statement and document the situation. "You might want to consider pressing charges," he suggested. "This has gone beyond simple trespassing." I nodded, realizing he was right. This wouldn't stop unless there were real consequences. "I'll think about it. In the meantime, I'm going to need to take some serious security measures." Over the next few weeks, I implemented a comprehensive security plan. I installed cameras covering the property boundaries and key areas. I reinforced gates and fencing. I also reached out to neighboring farmers, who were dealing with similar issues as development encroached on their land. We formed a local agricultural alliance and hired a lawyer specializing in property rights and agricultural law. She helped us draft clear legal notices about trespassing, liability, and the dangers of interfering with agricultural operations. We also began working with local officials to strengthen protections for agricultural land in our county. The final nail in Karen's coffin came from an unexpected source, her own HOA board. After learning about her actions and the potential legal liability she'd created for the association, they called an emergency meeting. Karen's crusade had exposed them to possible lawsuits, and her false 911 call could result in criminal charges that would embarrass the community. I attended that meeting with my lawyer and presented evidence of all the harassment, trespassing, and false accusations. I laid out the costs of damaged crops, security measures, and legal fees. Then I offered them a choice. Either remove Karen from the board and implement strict policies against trespassing on neighboring properties, or face a lawsuit that would name both the HOA and Karen personally as defendants. The board didn't even need to deliberate. Karen was voted out that night, and the HOA issued a formal apology along with new rules specifically prohibiting residents from entering neighboring private property. They also agreed to pay for a portion of my security costs and damaged crops. Karen, I heard later, was furious. She tried to rally support on social media, but the story of her false 911 call had spread through the community, and no one was interested in following her crusade anymore. A few months later, her house went up for sale, and she moved away. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, never assume that people understand or respect property rights. Second, documentation and legal preparation are essential when dealing with entitled individuals. And third, building alliances with others facing similar issues can create powerful solutions. These days, things are mostly peaceful. The HOA actually turned out to be decent neighbors once Karen was gone. They even invited local farmers to give presentations to new residents about agricultural operations and safety, helping bridge the gap between urban and rural perspectives. I still farm my land, proud to continue my family's legacy. The security cameras occasionally catch people taking photos of the sunset over my cornfields, but they stay on their side of the fence now. Sometimes I think about Karen and wonder if she learned anything from the experience. Probably not, but at least she learned that farming isn't just a quaint hobby, it's a serious business that deserves respect. But the story doesn't end there. About 6 months after Karen moved away, I received notice of a civil lawsuit. She was suing me for emotional distress and defamation, claiming my actions had forced her to sell her home at a loss and damaged her reputation in the community. She was asking for $250,000 in damages. I immediately contacted my lawyer, Mia Wilson, who had helped us with the HOA situation. She reviewed the lawsuit and actually laughed. "This is textbook frivolous litigation," she said. "She's alleging emotional distress from being prevented from trespassing on your property, and defamation from us literally showing videos of her own actions. We'll file a motion to dismiss and seek sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit." I was frustrated but not surprised. "She just won't give up, will she?" "People like this rarely do," Mia replied. "But this time, it's going to cost her." We filed our response, including a countersuit for legal fees and filing a motion for sanctions under Rule 11 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. This rule allows courts to punish attorneys and parties who file frivolous lawsuits or make baseless claims. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I walked into the courthouse feeling confident but nervous. I'd never been in a real courtroom before. Karen was there with her lawyer, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Wilson, no relation to my lawyer, didn't waste any time. "Before we begin, I want to be clear that I've reviewed all the submitted evidence thoroughly. Mrs. Thompson, your claims are problematic on multiple levels." Karen's lawyer tried to argue that I had weaponized the legal system against his client, causing her severe emotional distress. The judge cut him off. "Counselor, your client repeatedly trespassed on private property, organized others to do the same, made false statements to law enforcement, and endangered children by leading them into an area being treated with agricultural chemicals. The defendant's response was entirely appropriate and legally justified. The only person weaponizing anything here is your client." The judge turned to Karen. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm particularly troubled by your 911 call. Making false reports to emergency services is a serious matter that can result in criminal charges. You're fortunate the district attorney chose not to pursue that." Karen tried to speak up, but her lawyer wisely put a hand on her arm to stop her. The judge continued, "I'm dismissing your lawsuit with prejudice, which means you cannot refile it. Additionally, I'm granting the defendant's motion for sanctions. You and your attorney will be jointly responsible for paying all legal fees incurred in defending against this frivolous action." But she wasn't done. "Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Bar Association for review of counsel's conduct in filing this suit. And I'm issuing an injunction barring Mrs. Thompson from filing any future lawsuits related to this property or the defendant without prior court approval." Karen stormed out of the courtroom before the judge even finished speaking. Her lawyer stayed to apologize to the court and to me personally. Turns out Karen had misrepresented the facts to him, and he was already planning to withdraw from the case. The final bill for legal fees came to just over $15,000. Karen tried to dodge paying, but Mia was persistent. When Karen still refused to pay after 30 days, we filed liens against her new property. 2 weeks later, we received a certified check for the full amount. This whole experience led to some positive changes in our county. The Agricultural Alliance I helped form proposed new local ordinances specifically protecting agricultural operations from harassment and interference. The county commissioners, seeing the growing conflicts between urban expansion and farming communities, unanimously passed them. The ordinances included increased penalties for trespassing on agricultural land, requirements for real estate agents to provide buyers with information about neighboring farming operations, and the establishment of an agricultural protection zone that limited certain types of development near active farms. We also expanded our educational programs. Local schools now regularly bring students to tour working farms, and we developed a farm neighbor education program for new residents moving into agricultural areas. The program explains everything from why we spray crops at certain times to why slow-moving farm equipment sometimes delays traffic. The HOA at Wildflower Meadows became one of our strongest supporters. They now include information about neighboring farms in their welcome packets and even helped fund some of our educational initiatives. Their current president, a retired teacher named Tom, regularly attends our Agricultural Alliance meetings to stay informed about farming activities that might affect residents. I recently received an interesting piece of news through the grapevine. Karen had tried her same tactics in her new community, attempting to force a local dairy farm to shut down because of offensive odors. This time, though, she found herself facing not just the farmer, but an entire community educated about agricultural rights and protections. Her complaints went nowhere, and she's apparently looking to move again, this time to a fully urban area. The city did eventually build that trail system she wanted, but they did it right. They purchased appropriate land, planned it properly, and even incorporated educational signs about local agriculture along the portions that border farmland. On weekends, I sometimes see families reading those signs and pointing at my fields, learning about where their food comes from. Last month, I hosted a group of high school students for a day of hands-on farming experience. One girl raised her hand and asked, "Is it true that someone once tried to turn your farm into a walking trail?" I had to smile. Yes, that's true, but you know what? It taught me something important. Farming isn't just about growing crops. It's about protecting the land and educating people about why farms matter. The lawsuit turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It not only shut down Karen's harassment permanently, but also led to stronger protections for all farmers in our area. The legal precedent set by the judge's ruling has been cited in similar cases across the state, helping other farmers stand up to unreasonable demands from encroaching development. Our Agricultural Alliance has grown into a powerful voice for farming interests in local politics. We're regularly consulted on development plans and zoning changes, ensuring that new growth doesn't come at the expense of viable farmland. We've even started a mentorship program, pairing experienced farmers with young people interested in agricultural careers. Looking back, I'm glad I stood my ground. It would have been easier to give in to Karen's demands or sell the land to developers, but that wouldn't have been right. This farm isn't just my livelihood, it's my heritage and my responsibility. Standing up to Karen wasn't just about protecting my property. It was about preserving a way of life that's essential to our community and our food supply. The security cameras are still up, but these days they rarely catch trespassers. Instead, they sometimes record people taking pictures of sunsets over the cornfields from the public trail, enjoying the view of the farm from a respectful distance, just as it should be. My grandfather would be proud to see how things turned out. The farm isn't just surviving, it's thriving. And thanks to the changes we helped bring about, it's more likely than ever to stay in agricultural production for generations to come. Sometimes the biggest threats lead to the strongest defenses, and in this case, Karen's entitled crusade led to lasting protections for all farmers in our community. That's the real victory here, not just stopping one person's unreasonable demands, but helping create a framework that protects agricultural land and promotes understanding between farmers and their urban neighbors. It's proof that when farmers stand together and fight smart, we can preserve our way of life even as the world changes around us.